Hello and welcome to the agenda here on the Blood Red YouTube channel. I'm Kai Delaney and I'm joined by Matt Addison from Blood Red. Matt, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Some good a result at least for Liverpool. Maybe not the performance this weekend, but some positivity. I think a much needed win at Anfield.
We are recording this shortly after Liverpool's 2-1 win over Aston Villa at Anfield, but obviously this is coming to you on Sunday. We are talking today all things transfers, so not too long to go now until the end of the season, and just to kind of look ahead, really see what Liverpool may or may not need to do this summer. First of all, just a kind of general question, Matt. What are your thoughts?
I think there's sort of been a few questions asked. I know speaking to supporters and journalists of other clubs looking at Liverpool, particularly Aston Villa, obviously in the week leading up to this, there seems to be a sort of idea that given the way that Liverpool's season has gone, maybe it'll be, a big summer for them in terms of transfers. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure that will be the case. I know we're going to go through each position very shortly, but I think there's sort of minor things for Liverpool to do rather than wholesale changes. I wouldn't expect them to spend a huge amount of money, certainly not compared to one or two of the other clubs. I think it's more a case of finding a bit more squad depth. I think that's certainly an attack, something that they will have to look at, maybe try and replicate what they did last summer with Diogo Jota and try and find the next version of him. But I don't think there's going to be huge changes. I think Liverpool, as I say, will try and refine things. And I think it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But you look at Van Dijk, you look at Gomez, they are effectively going to be like new signings for Liverpool next season. So I think there's going to be two or three, I would imagine, but I wouldn't expect there to be many more than that.
Not expecting too much this summer then, but we are going to go through each position and assess what that could look like for Liverpool. So we'll start in goal. Obviously, there's no questions over Addison. He is Liverpool's number one, arguably the best keeper in the world, and looks set to remain at Anfield for some time. Moving down behind him, though, we've got Adrian, who's coming to the end of his 2-year contract this summer. Hasn't really been any news, or it doesn't seem as if he will be renewing. So as far as we're concerned, he's set to leave. That begs the question: is Cleveland Kelleher ready to be Liverpool's number two, or do Liverpool go in and get almost another Adrian, someone with a little bit more experience?
To be honest, I think Kelleher is already Liverpool's number two. We've seen him a couple of times this season. I think you'd be pretty happy with him. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what they do with Adrian. I know he's maybe much derided by Liverpool supporters, but as far as we're aware, he's a popular-ish figure in the dressing room. Seems to have a good effect, and John Achterberg and the Liverpool goalkeepers have quite a tight knit group where they all learn from each other. They train together, obviously, and obviously that sort of relationship and closeness is really important. So I think I wouldn't be against Adrian having another season at Liverpool. I wouldn't imagine it'd be anything more than that, but I'm pretty sure that he'd probably be happy to stick around and get one or two games for Liverpool next season. So I think that is one to watch out for. There's obviously a lot more high profile contracts for Liverpool to look at over the next few months rather than Adrian, but it wouldn't be a massive shock, I don't think, to see him stick around. But yeah, in terms of the pecking order, obviously we know Alisson is number one, but I think for me, Kelleher has certainly done enough to be number two, and I think he has across the course of this season proven that that's sort of where he stands. Obviously, he's been injured recently. That's why he's maybe not been on the bench for Liverpool as much over the last few weeks. But I think once he's back and fit and ready, I think there's absolutely no question about it. And you look at as well at Marcelo Pitaluga. I know he's obviously not been at the club for very long. I think he's still only 17, but I think long term he is one certainly to watch out for. So I think there's enough there to suggest that Liverpool maybe won't go out and buy someone, but yeah, certainly. I think the three goalkeepers at senior level that they've got, I wouldn't be massively shocked if they stayed the same next season.
Yeah, I think whether Adrian stays or decides to leave or doesn't have his contract renewed, that Kelleher, as you say, probably does seem set to be Liverpool's number two. My only concern would be if Alisson picks up a knock or an injury and could be out for kind of 8 to 10 games, whether Kelleher is kind of set for a prolonged spell in the side as opposed to playing in the cup matches and things. But yeah, an interesting one to look out for there. So moving forward, then we'll come to right back to start with. Obviously, Trent Alexander-Arnold, his situation has been well documented in the media the last few weeks. He's not going anywhere, of course. Liverpool's number one right back. Again, maybe similar to the goalkeeper situation. Got Nico Williams there, but will that be enough, do you think, going forward?
I think it depends partly on what they do at centre back, to be honest. I think there's a bit of a knock on effect in that regard. And obviously, we're still trying to work out exactly what it will be in that sort of area. So I think if they were to sign, say, Ibrahima Konate, if I can say that properly, the Leipzig centre half, he, I think, can play at right back. Obviously, Joe Gomez has played at right back as well. I think it's a question really for me in terms of Liverpool going out and buying a specialist right back. It'll depend on what they think of Nico Williams and what Nico Williams thinks of his chances of getting into this team this season. We've seen, both Nico Williams and Kostas Tsimikas on the opposite side have struggled for minutes, maybe not quite have had the trust of Jurgen Klopp and his coaching staff. But, another year along the development for Nico Williams, I'd be pretty happy with him as the backup. And obviously Trent is the number one. But I suppose it's similar to, like you say, with the goalkeeping situation. Would you be happy if Trent was to miss 10, 15 games or whatever across the course of a season if you had to play Nico for all of that time? You do wonder. But yeah, for me, if they could get someone like Konate in, that would give you the option of playing him at right back at times, because obviously Van Dijk and Gomez, you would hope, would be fit for certainly much longer than they have been this season. And Joe Gomez can play there as well. So it's an interesting one to sort of balance out. And I think it's always a difficult one, isn't it, with first team squads at that level, because obviously you can look at Manchester City and they've got sort of two players in every position, but you just don't really see that Liverpool would go down that same path in terms of the finances, the wages, and all of that sort of thing as well. So yeah, for me, I think it'll probably just be Nico Williams there.
You've almost covered two questions in one there, because that's the right back taken care of, and a lot of the centre backs mentioned as well. So I guess that leaves questions over Kabak. What do they decide to do with his clause? Obviously, the option to purchase him for 18 million plus add-ons in the summer, and then maybe Nat Phillips as well. He stepped up to the plate when called upon this season. But would Liverpool be happy for him to stay, and would he be happy as a fifth choice centre back?
Again, I think it's a really interesting one. I mean, the Konate thing is certainly far from finalised at this moment in time. Still discussions to take place and still things for Liverpool to work out. They've got a short list of a few players that they are still looking at, and certainly it'd be interesting to see which route they go down. I think Ozan Kabak is probably on that list as well. I'd be surprised if they went for both of those players, just because that would eat up a significant chunk of their budget. But it's so hard to judge Kabak and Phillips at the moment, isn't it? Because they have done really, really well. But for me, Nat Phillips is not at the level that Liverpool need moving forward. I don't think, he's done a huge amount wrong, but you just think of, that there's been odd moments where he's been caught out of position. There's been, certainly in the Real Madrid game, you sort of felt that the centre-backs were a little bit exposed. And okay, you can get away with it for the majority of games in the Premier League, but for Liverpool to get back to winning the Champions League, winning the Premier League, I do think you need to get a better option than him in. So I think it would be harsh to let him go. I think it will essentially come down to what Nat Phillips wants to do in that regard. Does he want to be fifth choice? I certainly think that you'd look at Van Dijk, Gomez, Matip, a new signing, whoever that is, Kabak or Konate or whoever it might be. I think Phillips would have to be comfortably fifth choice for me to be happy to see him sticking around. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting situation for those two. I think they obviously got used to playing a lot of football this season, but as soon as Van Dijk or Gomez is back, if you had one of those two players available, they'd go straight back in. And I don't think it's a massive shock really in terms of Phillips. Earlier in the season, of course, Reece Williams was playing ahead of him, so yeah. I think that pretty much shows really what Jurgen Klopp deep down thinks is his long-term future. But there's no doubt about it. He could go to a top-level championship side, probably even a team in the bottom half of the Premier League and get regular minutes. So I suppose you could say almost he deserves to make that choice himself for what he's done for Liverpool this season. If he wants to go and play more regular football, so be it. But if he wants to stick about, I think he'd certainly have to get used to being on the bench at the very least. And of course, there's Ben Davies to think about as well. I don't know what you think about his future, but it's been a strange one so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was actually talking about this with a friend today. I was asked what's his situation, given that he hasn't kicked the ball since he signed for Liverpool in January. But I mean, personally, I think the fact that we haven't seen him and he's still behind the likes of Nat Phillips probably says a lot. And it wouldn't surprise me. I have no knowledge or information, but it wouldn't surprise me to see it maybe moved on in the summer. I know there were very strong links with Celtic before he did sign for Liverpool in January. So, yeah, one to watch there. And I think on the Phillips point as well, for me, I wouldn't have any problems if he was to stay at Liverpool as maybe a fifth choice centre back. I think he's probably earned that over his form this season. But again, I completely agree with you. I think even a lower end Premier League side, maybe a team kind of in the bottom half, fighting relegation, that kind of thing, he'd be well within his rights to go and play, demand kind of regular football at that sort of level. So an interesting one with the centre back situation this summer, and probably one that is going to dominate most of Liverpool's transfer window. So moving on to left back, probably a similar situation to the one we had at right back. So you've got a guaranteed first choice, one of the best in the world in Andy Robertson. It's the Kostas Tsimikas question, isn't it? We've not seen a lot of him this season. There have even been links with him leaving Liverpool. I'd be shocked if that was to happen after a season. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, again, it's a really, really strange one, isn't it? He's not been injured. He's just not been selected. I'm sure we're going to see Tsimikas at some point before the end of this season. I'm sure that he'll get his chance in the Premier League. I think he's only made one appearance. I think that was in the defeat to Manchester City, wasn't it? So really sort of thrown in the deep end off the substitutes bench on that occasion. But I'm sure we'll see a little bit of him before the end of the season. I wasn't surprised that he didn't come in against Aston Villa because we know the importance of the game and the threat that they have. But yeah, it's a strange one. I think I'd be happy enough as long as the player himself is happy enough to play a squad role, which, let's face it, he would have known that was the case when he signed for Liverpool. Nothing really has changed. I suppose you might expect sort of 5 or 6 more Premier League starts or something like that. But I'm sure there's a good chance that once he's settled in further at Liverpool, once they've got proper centre-backs at centre-back, if you've got Van Dijk and Gomez to play alongside, and I'm sure Jurgen Klopp would have far less of an issue throwing in Tsimikas for the odd game. I think it's only been the case that he's not trusted him because of the disruption around him. So, yeah, I'd be more than happy to keep Tsimikas as backup, and I don't think there's really any need for Liverpool to change much in that position.
Moving up the pitch then and into midfield, there's just so many options. I'd be staggered if we signed anyone this year, surely. If you go through them, we've got Fabinho, Jordan Henderson, Thiago Alcantara, obviously Gini Wijnaldum, who seems set to leave as his contract runs down. And then the likes of Naby Keita, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Curtis Jones coming through. So many options there. It's going to be a case of possibly outs rather than ins, isn't it? James Milner as well, sorry.
Yeah, James Milner as well, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's an area of the pitch that I think Liverpool really have to think about very carefully. I mean, it looks like they've made the decision that they want to move Gini Wijnaldum on. I think that's come about because he's a similar sort of age as Thiago and Henderson, and you want to sort of move those players on and get new players in over the course of 3 or 4 seasons rather than doing it all at once. So I think it kind of depends on what Liverpool think is going to be their formation next season. I think if we see another attacker come in, they maybe go more towards a 4-2-3-1 formation. Maybe then you don't need a replacement for Gini Wijnaldum. But if Liverpool are going to stick with this 4-3-3, they're going to continue to play the way that they have for the last couple of seasons under Jurgen Klopp. I think it would be very hard not to bring in somebody. We know that Thiago's had his injury problems at times. Fabinho has this season. Jordan Henderson always every season seems to have a month or so out at least. So I think just the fact that Wijnaldum plays pretty much every minute for Liverpool, it would be a shock to me if they didn't sign somebody to replace him, if they're going to go about it in a similar sort of way tactically next season. So who that would be, I'm not too sure. There's been links with loads and loads of midfielders, hasn't there? There's always going to be when
Renato Sanchez has been doing the rounds.
Yeah, Renato Sanchez, Rodrigo de Paul as well. I think is one. I think Udinese is an option for Liverpool, but there's going to be so many names linked with Liverpool, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was one maybe a bit more left field that hasn't been linked, that they just went and got and sort of replaced Gini Wijnaldum on the quiet. Really, I don't think it's going to be a huge mega money arrival that comes in, particularly because they're going to lose Wijnaldum on a free. But for me, it would make a huge amount of sense to get one more in. I know you've listed off a huge number of players. Marco Grujic is coming back from his loan, hasn't really gone for him over in Portugal with Porto, but there is so many options. But when you've got somebody as reliable and as consistent really as Gini Wijnaldum, I think you kind of have to replace him, even if it's a player who would be, let's say, fourth choice behind Thiago, Fabinho, and Henderson. I just think with the injury record of those three, you've got to go and get someone. And I suppose it offers an opportunity if Liverpool wanted to go and get somebody a bit more creative. They wanted to go and get more, almost of a number 10 maybe, to go down that route. It doesn't necessarily have to be like for like in terms of replacing Wijnaldum, but I do think they've just got to get one more body in there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. As you say, we have plenty of numbers. I think that the one concern maybe when you go through the individuals, lots of injury problems throughout. So as you say, Jordan Henderson may be prone to missing a few weeks here and there. Fabinho has had his personal problems this season, and then even going on to the players that would maybe come in to replace them. Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and his kind of long-term injuries that he's had since his time at Liverpool, and obviously Naby Keita has struggled to get a run of games together ever since he signed, really. So I think we definitely have the numbers there, but maybe signing someone without injury problems is always high on the agenda. But maybe
I think that there's a lot of numbers there as well. But I mean, there's got to be a question over someone like Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Will he be at Liverpool next season? Even Naby Keita. I mean, I think if a tempting offer came in for Liverpool, I mean, I don't know what you think about this, but I wouldn't see it as a massive shock if one or two of those players did move on if a decent offer came in. I mean, it's maybe slightly reactionary after Naby Keita was taken off before half time, but if a big offer came in for him, do you think Liverpool could afford to not accept that?
It's an interesting one because obviously they paid a lot of money for him. They waited a year for him to come to Liverpool after the deal had been agreed, and we've yet to see the best of him. I do think, as all Liverpool signings, he's a Klopp player, but I think he's one that Klopp really still wants to succeed at Liverpool. I think picking him for Liverpool's biggest game of the season probably showed that. I don't think Klopp would be happy to give up on him just yet. I think possibly one more season, but because he has had, or rather he hasn't had the ability to string a lot of games together and put his stamp on this team, I think Klopp will maybe want to give him just one more chance. And with Wijnaldum leaving and Milner aging, he may find those opportunities more frequent next season.
I think it sort of depends as well on European football, doesn't it? We don't know which competition Liverpool are in. If they were to drop out of Europe completely, that would completely alter their transfer plans. But assuming they are in Europe, they are going to need those numbers, aren't they? So, yeah, it would be a surprise if they let lots of these players go. But I just think, with 2 years left for Keita and 2 years left on the contract for Oxlade-Chamberlain, there is a big decision to be made on those two.
Yeah, I could maybe see one of the two leaving, maybe just from their own personal perspectives as well. You think, would they be happy to sit on the bench when they're meant to be in the prime of their careers, when they could maybe Keita could conceivably go back to the Bundesliga, or you could see Chamberlain maybe just dropping down just a level or two below Liverpool and really kind of finding his feet there. But lots to decide on for Liverpool and Michael Edwards this summer in midfield. Moving on to the final position in the forward line. Really, at the moment, there's 4 options into 3 in terms of starters. Obviously, Sadio Mane, Diogo Jota, Roberto Firmino, and Mohamed Salah. So, assuming that none of those 4 would leave Liverpool this summer, I think it's fair to say that's probably unlikely. You then go down behind them to the kind of reserves, if you like. So, all the fringe players, the likes of Xherdan, Shaqiri, Divock Origi, and we've got Takumi Minamino out on loan. at Southampton. Ralph Hasenhüttl saying earlier this week that they won't be looking to sign him on a permanent deal. So the first four are kind of set, I would say. What do you think it goes beyond that? Does Liverpool maybe move one or two out and bring one or two in?
Pretty much, yeah. I think they absolutely have to move on. At least two out of Origi, Shaqiri, and Minamino. Which two you would choose? I mean, my preference out of the two would be to move Origi on. I think his time at Anfield is now up. I think you've got to say that he's a cult hero for what he's done for Liverpool, but he's just not at the required level anymore. And a bit like Oxlade-Chamberlain and Keita, you wonder, whether for his career, the age that he is now, he could go somewhere else and play regularly. And I think that's what he needs. He's one of those players, isn't he, that if you give him a few games, he can sort of put together some form, but he's just never, ever going to get that at Liverpool, I don't think, moving forward. So I think it's time for him to move on. Similarly, Xherdan Shaqiri as well, he's not had probably as many minutes as what he would have wanted this season. Very, very nearly moved on last summer. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I'm pretty sure Liverpool could have got certainly above 20, maybe closer to 25 million for him last summer. They won't get anywhere near that this year, but there's a good chance, I think, that he moves on. And Minamino's a really interesting one. It hasn't quite worked for him at Southampton. You thought if he was going to get himself into contention for Liverpool, it really had to. And that was a club and a manager that really suited him, but it's just not quite happened for him. He had a good couple of games to begin with, but then hasn't really kicked on. And you wonder if that will be enough for Liverpool. So again, it wouldn't be a huge shock if two or three of those players moved on, but then of course you've got to get better quality in to replace them. So for me, I think Harvey Elliott takes care of one of the two additions that I would make in the forward line. So obviously that's not a signing. He's been out on loan in the Championship, and had Shaqiri moved on last summer, Harvey Elliott would have been the replacement for him. So it only sort of makes sense to move that forward to this year and assume that the same would be the case. But then it's a case of like I said at the start, finding another Diogo Jota. Again, I don't know who that is, whether there is somebody that you could sort of profile in the same sort of way. I think, that is what Liverpool would be looking for. I think if you had sort of 5 players to go into the 3 or 4 attacking positions, plus you then had Harvey Elliott as well, I think that would be absolutely perfect for Liverpool. And with a sort of Diogo Jota type signing as well, you can start to plan for the future without Mane, Firmino and Salah. So that's the next step, I think, for me, is finding someone that is relatively cheap. Obviously, 40-odd million for Jota isn't an insignificant sum of money, but it's relatively cheap for the quality and the age and the profile. I think Liverpool have to find someone similar to that, really, that can play in all 3 of those front positions. And that there'll be a few names linked, I'm sure, but I wouldn't again be surprised if it was a name like Jota that last summer just came out of the blue. Liverpool took him and nobody else was really looking at him, but they've obviously found a huge amount of value in that market. So that would be the strategy for me. I think Liverpool need to move on a couple. Harvey Elliott comes in and then one more. Pedro Neto is one that would interest me, but I'm sure there's plenty of other perhaps cheaper options that Michael Edwards will be taking a look at.
Yeah, I'm not sure Wolves fans would be too happy if we raided Jota and Pedro Neto in successive summers. I have to say I agree with you there. I think 2 of Shaqiri, Origi and Minamino probably leave. For me, I'd have to say probably Origi. As you say, his time's just coming to a natural end. I think he was the cult hero and was rewarded with that contract off the back of his incredible finish to the 18-19 season. But even last season really didn't get much of a look in, and probably less so this year with the signing of Jota. Minamino for me is still one I'd like to see work, but I'm not entirely sure it will. I think it was one of those where it was such a low risk, 7.25 million, the release clause. It was almost, why not? The worst that happens is it doesn't work out and we can sell him for probably the same we bought him for, if not even make a profit. So I think there's kind of nothing ventured, nothing gained there. And of the 3, Shaqiri for me is the one that is more of a Liverpool standard. I think every time he's called upon, he does have an impact, and we saw it in the win over Aston Villa. Came on with 10 minutes to go and was involved in the goal at the end. So I would like to see him stay, but I think for him, maybe just in terms of, similar to kind of Oxlade-Chamberlain, Keita, as we mentioned, maybe just time for him to move on and think about his own career. But yeah, Harvey Elliott, definitely, maybe to have a similar kind of season as Curtis Jones has this year. I think Jones has played a lot more than anybody's expected, and Liverpool clearly rate Harvey Elliott highly, and that's why they were wanting to send him out on loan to Blackburn to get that first team experience rather than just playing with the 23s at Kirby. So yeah, I think Harvey Elliott plus one, I'd go with you on that. So that's all we've got time for on this episode of The Agenda, assessing Liverpool's transfer plans for the summer. Lots on the agenda for Michael Edwards, Jurgen Klopp, and the rest of Liverpool's recruitment team. I've been Kai Delaney. Thanks, Matt Addison, for your time. And until next time, bye for now.